Imagine, right, imagine walking into this bustling hospital in Baghdad.
Oh, yeah.
Somewhere in the, late 9th century. And the guy running this hospital is, by all accounts, the greatest physician alive.
Absolutely legendary.
Right. He treats the poor for free. He directs these massive medical wards. He's a total favorite of the ruling elite. But if you sit in on his lectures...
This is the crazy part.
It is wild. This highly respected, state-sponsored doctor is openly teaching his students that all prophets are frauds.
Yeah.
He's literally arguing that religion is the primary cause of bloody wars, and that these sacred, revealed texts are, well, they're practically useless compared to books on geometry or medicine.
Completely useless in his eyes, yeah.
And somehow, in a deeply, deeply religious empire, he isn't executed for this. I mean, in fact, he thrives.
He really does. It's a scenario that completely shatters our modern preconceptions, right, about the medieval world. Because we tend to view history through these really compartmentalized lenses. Like we put strict rational logic over in one box, and we put profound, unshakable religious faith in another entirely different box.
Right, like they can't ever touch.
Exactly. But the reality is that the tension between those two forces has always been incredibly messy.
Which brings us to the mission for this deep dive, because you, the listener, you are joining us today on this comprehensive journey through one of the most intellectually explosive periods in human history.
Truly.
The Golden Age of Muslim philosophy. And we are pulling our insights today from excerpts of this incredibly detailed text, A History of Muslim Philosophy.
Right.
We're going to explore how 5 titanic thinkers, I mean, these guys are heavyweights, Al-Kindi, Al-Razi, Al-Farabi, Miskawayh, and Ibn Sina, how they wrestled with this exact tension between reason and revelation.
And just to set the historical stage for you here, we are talking about a period roughly from the 8th to the 11th centuries. The Islamic world, centered around cultural hubs like Baghdad, Ray, Aleppo, it was the undisputed epicenter of intellectual synthesis.
Like a massive melting pot of ideas.
Exactly. You had this huge translation movement where Greek, Syriac, Persian, and Indian texts were all just flowing into the Arabic language.
Wow.
But, and this is a spoiler alert, these thinkers didn't just translate ancient Greek thought like Aristotle and Plato and just, call it a day.
Right. They didn't just photocopy it.
No, not at all. They completely re-engineered it to decode the universe, to understand human nature, and to map the mechanics of the mind.
Okay, let's unpack this but actually, before we get into the actual mechanics of these philosophies, we need to state our parameters for this discussion.
Definitely a good idea.
Right, because in exploring these 5 thinkers, we are going to be covering some highly, highly charged topics.
That's right. So, a brief note to you listening, we will be looking at rigorous philosophical arguments for the existence of God, right, as well as radical arguments against prophecy, against organized religion, and, intense debates over the very nature of the divine.
And we just want to be entirely clear here. We are not endorsing any specific religious, anti-religious, or theological viewpoints today.
No, not at all.
Our job is simply to impartially, neutrally report on these fascinating historical arguments, exactly as they are laid out in our source material.
We are just here to explore the ideas and the logic, not to take sides.
Exactly. And to explore that logic, we have to start at the beginning.
Right.
Because before you can have this massive society-altering debate about reason versus revelation.
Someone has to actually build the foundation.
Yes. Someone has to introduce the rigorous tools of reason to the culture. You need a foundational vocabulary. And that begins with our first figure, a man named Al-Kindi.
Al-Kindi is, he's the necessary starting point. He lived from roughly 801 to 873, and he's widely known as the philosopher of the Arabs. He was essentially the first Arab-Muslim philosopher. And what immediately stands out in the sources is just his encyclopedic output. I mean, we are talking about over 270 written works.
Which is, I was looking at the list of his works, and it's staggering.
It really is.
It's not just metaphysics either. He wrote about, planetary movements, meteorology, geometry, medicine.
Everything.
Yeah. There's even this bizarre but really fascinating story in the text about him curing a wealthy merchant's son.
Oh, I love this story.
Right. The son had sudden paralysis, and Al-Kindi cured him using nothing but music.
Yeah.
He essentially prescribed a specific lute melody to, shock the nervous system back into working.
He was a true polymath in every sense of the word. He masterfully translated and clarified these Greek and Syriac texts, bringing them into the Arabic lexicon.
So he's doing the heavy lifting of translation.
Right. And interestingly, he also translated works that were, well, they were wrongly attributed to Aristotle at the time.
Oh.
Yeah, they were actually written by the Neoplatonist philosopher Plotinus.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which, as you can imagine, heavily influenced the direction of Islamic philosophy. Because they thought they were getting pure Aristotle, but they were actually getting a mix.
That's a huge mix-up.
It is. But, personally, he was a bit of a contradiction, Al-Kindi was.
Yeah.
The famous essayist Al-Jahiz, he actually caricatured Al-Kindi for his supposed avarice, his greed.
Like a miser.
Yeah. But then the sources also note he lived this highly luxurious life in a house with a vast garden where he bred all sorts of curious exotic animals.
Okay, so he sounds a bit like an eccentric aristocrat.
A bit, yeah.
But let's look at his philosophical project. Because his main goal, as I understand it, was conciliation.
Yes.
He wanted to build a bridge between the mathematical logic of the Greeks and the revealed truth of the Quran.
Exactly.
And to do that, he had to tackle the concept of God.
Right. And to do this, Al-Kindi aligned his philosophy with a really prominent group of rationalist theologians at the time. They were known as the Mutazilites.
The Mutazilites.
Yeah. And the absolute core of their framework was the uncompromising unicity of God. The idea of tawhid.
Meaning oneness?
Oneness, yes. They argued that God has no genus, no species, and absolutely no attributes that would imply any kind of plurality. God is simply the true one.
So I want to pause on this concept of no attributes. Because, to a modern listener, that sounds pretty strange.
It does sound counterintuitive.
Because usually religious traditions, they love to list God's attributes, right? God is all-knowing, God is all-powerful, God is merciful.
Sure, you see that everywhere.
But the Mutazilite argument, which Al-Kindi adopts, is that if you say God has knowledge and has power...
You're splitting God up.
Exactly. You are logically implying that God is made up of separate parts. You have the essence of God, plus this separate thing called knowledge, plus this separate thing called power.
Exactly. And if God is made up of parts, then God is a composite being.
Okay.
And a composite being, by definition, depends on its parts to exist.
Oh, I see.
Which means it isn't the ultimate independent reality, because the parts have to exist for the whole to exist.
That makes sense.
So for Al-Kindi, to apply human categories or distinct attributes to God, it's a logical violation. It literally breaks the math of absolute oneness.
Wow.
The universe is characterized by multiplicity and parts. God is the absolute indivisible one.
But this mathematical approach, it leads Al-Kindi into a massive collision with Aristotle, doesn't it?
A huge collision, yeah.
Because Aristotle, who is basically the gold standard for logic at this time, right?
Oh, completely. The absolute authority.
Right. Aristotle argued that the universe is eternal. It has always existed. It will always exist. There is no single moment of creation.
Right.
But Islamic theology requires a universe created from nothing. Creatio ex nihilo, by the will of God.
And this is where Al-Kindi does some of his most original work. He looks at this theological requirement for a created universe.
Yeah.
And instead of just quoting scripture to prove it, which would be the easy way out, he decides to prove it using strict geometric axioms.
Oh, wow.
He sets out to prove the universe is finite.
Okay, this is the part of the text I had to read like 3 times.
It's dense.
It's so dense. Trying to prove the universe has a temporal beginning using geometry. It feels like a category error, you know?
Yeah.
It's like trying to weigh a soul with a kitchen scale.
That's a great way to put it.
How does he actually structure this argument?
Well, it requires a bit of mental gymnastics, but the logic is incredibly tight once you see it. He starts with basic mathematical theorems of magnitude.
Okay.
So he lays out a few axioms. First, imagine 2 magnitudes of the same kind.
Like 2 lines.
Exactly, 2 lines. If you add a finite magnitude to one of them...
So I add an inch to one line.
Right. They're no longer equal.
Okay, tracking.
Second, 2 magnitudes cannot be infinite if one is less than the other.
Wait, why not?
Because the lesser one would serve as a measure for the greater one, or at least a part of it, which implies a limit. If you can measure something against something else, it's not truly infinite.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
If the shorter line is a boundary, then the longer one can't be infinite.
Exactly. And third, the sum of 2 finite magnitudes must, by definition, be finite.
Okay, so I follow the geometry part, but how does he map lines and physical magnitudes onto, like, time and creation?
So he applies this directly to the Aristotelian definitions of time, space, and movement. Aristotle argued that time is not movement itself.
Okay.
Time is the number, or the measure, of motion. It is a continuous sum of befores and afters.
Right.
So Al-Kindi takes this and says, well, if time is a measure, a continuous sum of instants, then time is a quantity.
Ah.
Space and movement are also quantities.
I see exactly where this is going.
Right. Physical bodies are composed of matter and form, and they exist within spatial limits.
Yeah.
Therefore, the body of the universe is finite.
Okay.
If the physical universe is finite, the movement associated with it must be finite. And since time is just the measure of that movement, time itself must be finite.
Wow.
He argues that if you count the instants of time backwards, you cannot count infinitely. An infinite number cannot be traversed.
Because you never finish counting backwards.
Exactly. Therefore, time must have a starting point. The universe has a beginning.
I'm just struck by how much this sounds like a medieval precursor to the debates around the Big Bang.
It really does, doesn't it?
Yeah, because modern physics argues that space and time are not just this infinite empty box that the universe sits inside.
Right.
Rather, space and time themselves were created at a specific starting point.
Yes. Inextricably linked to matter.
Exactly. And Al-Kindi is using the axioms of magnitude to argue that time cannot stretch backward infinitely.
He's using the Greek tools of logic to defeat the Greek conclusion of an eternal universe.
That is brilliant.
It is. And for Al-Kindi, this proves that logical demonstration, meaning philosophy and divine revelation, ultimately lead to the exact same truth. Only God, who exists entirely outside of these quantitative magnitudes, is eternal.
But, okay, if philosophy and revelation arrive at the same destination, why do we need prophets?
Ah, the million-dollar question.
Right, because if a philosopher can just use math to figure out the universe, what is the point of Scripture?
Right.
The source text uses this analogy of an elevator versus the stairs.
Yes, I like that one.
The prophet gets the instantaneous elevator ride to the truth, while the philosopher has to take the grueling mathematical stairs.
The elevator analogy, it really captures the speed, but we need to deepen it a bit to understand Al-Kindi's full argument here.
Okay.
Al-Kindi believed that prophetic knowledge is a divine science. It is bestowed by God instantaneously without the prophet needing to, sit down and study geometry or logic for decades.
It downloaded.
Exactly. It requires a purification of the soul, yes, but not academic research. Philosophical knowledge, on the other hand, is a human science. It requires time, error, and grueling effort.
But here is my issue with the elevator analogy.
Okay.
If the prophet just gets beamed up to the top floor, they know the view from the roof, sure.
Right.
But they don't know how the building was constructed. The philosopher who took the stairs, they've mapped every floor, every load-bearing wall, every staircase.
They've done the work.
Doesn't that make the philosopher's knowledge functionally superior, even if they arrive at the same truth?
See, that is exactly the tension that will explode with our next thinker.
Oh, I bet.
But for Al-Kindi, the prophet's knowledge isn't inferior, and that's because its source is the divine will itself. Furthermore, the prophet's knowledge comes packaged with a persuasive power, a clarity designed for the masses.
Okay, I see.
A philosopher cannot convince an entire society to act morally by handing them a geometry textbook.
That's true. Here, read these proofs on magnitudes, and please don't steal.
Exactly. It doesn't work. The prophet delivers the truth in a way that moves humanity. So Al-Kindi believed that through proper philosophic interpretation, the two paths perfectly conciliate. The philosopher understands the architecture, but the prophet holds the blueprint from the architect.
Okay, so Al-Kindi meticulously builds this beautiful, mathematically precise bridge between faith and reason.
He reconciles them.
Right. But as we move forward in the source material, we encounter a thinker who looks at Al-Kindi's bridge, points out all the structural flaws, and essentially decides to dynamite the whole thing.
He just blows it up.
He says, "We don't need the bridge to revelation. Reason alone is sufficient." And that brings us back to the man in the Baghdad hospital, Al-Razi.
Muhammad ibn Zakaria al-Razi. He lived from 865 to 925. And if Al-Kindi was the pioneer conciliator, Al-Razi was the radical rationalist.
And his biographical journey is just as fascinating as his philosophy, honestly.
It really is.
Because he didn't start as a scholar, he was a lute player, a musician.
Right.
Then he shifted his obsession to alchemy, conducting these intense chemical experiments.
And the alchemy, it had some serious occupational hazards, right?
It did. The chemical fumes from his alchemical work severely damaged his eyes.
Yes.
Though the sources do note a rather amusing, albeit likely apocryphal, rumor that his eye problems were caused by eating an excessive amount of broad beans.
I love that detail. Fumes or beans, take your pick.
Right. But regardless of what caused it, his desperate search for a cure for his failing eyesight led him into the study of medicine.
Yes,
And he became an absolute titan in the medical field.
he did. The physical description of him in the text is so vivid. It describes him as this venerable, authoritative figure with a head like a sack.
A head like a sack. I assume that means a large, somewhat misshapen head, but, one that commands respect.
Right, right. He directed the main hospitals in Ray and Baghdad, and his teaching method was entirely unique. He taught in concentric circles.
Yeah, the clinical hierarchy.
Exactly. So patients or junior students with questions, they would first approach the outermost circle of novice students.
Okay.
If those novices couldn't answer the medical query, the question was passed to the inner circle of more advanced students.
And so on.
Right. Only if everyone in the entire hierarchy failed to provide an answer would the question finally reach Al-Razi himself, sitting in the center.
It's an incredibly efficient way to triage information.
Brilliant, really.
And he was known for his immense generosity, treating the poor without charge.
Yes.
But intellectually, the guy was ruthless.
Completely ruthless.
Let's get into his philosophical arguments. Specifically, his stance on prophecy, because this is where he radically breaks from his entire cultural environment.
Oh, yeah.
Al-Razi completely and unequivocally rejected the concept of prophecy.
He did. And we largely know his arguments through the extensive refutations written by his furious opponents.
Because they were mad.
Oh, they were furious. People like the Ismaili missionary Abu Hatim al-Razi. But even filtered through his enemies, al-Razi's arguments are astonishingly audacious.
So what was his main argument against it?
His core premise was egalitarian. He argued that God created all human beings with equal intellectual dispositions. We all possess reason. Therefore, he asked, what is the logical or moral justification for God privileging only a select few individuals with divine guidance?
Oh, wow. Why pick favorites?
Exactly. Why pick favorites if everyone has reason?
And his argument isn't just theoretical either. He points to the practical results of prophecy.
Right, the real-world impact.
He argues that elevating one person as an exclusive conduit for God doesn't bring enlightenment or peace. It brings bloodshed.
Yeah.
Every nation believes in its own prophets. They vehemently deny the prophets of other nations, and the result is endless religious war.
Exactly. For al-Razi, reason alone, which is universally distributed, is entirely sufficient to distinguish between good and evil and to organize our lives in the best possible way.
So he just didn't need the texts at all.
He subjected sacred texts to systematic, blistering criticism. He denied their miraculous nature entirely.
Wow.
He explicitly stated that scientific books on medicine, geometry, astronomy are vastly more useful to humanity than any revealed texts.
Because they're verifiable.
Yes. Because science is discovered through human intelligence, it is cumulative and it is verifiable. Revelation, in his view, is just unprovable inspiration that demands blind obedience.
This circles back to my scenario at the beginning of the deep dive. How on earth did a man in the Islamic world of the 9th and 10th centuries openly reject prophecy, call religious texts useless, and not just survive, but maintain a position as a highly respected hospital director?
It's a huge paradox.
It seems impossible given our modern assumptions about medieval blasphemy laws.
It's a crucial point, and it speaks to a really fascinating historical reality of the Abbasid era, particularly in intellectual hubs like Baghdad and Ray.
Okay, set the scene for me.
Now, there were certainly political and religious lines you couldn't cross without immense risk, obviously. But the intellectual climate could also be incredibly pluralistic. There was a robust tradition of the Mawsleys.
The Modules.
Yes. A salon or debate council, often hosted by rulers, viziers, or wealthy elites. And in these debates, scholars of different faiths, Muslims, Christians, Jews, Zoroastrians, and even outright skeptics, were encouraged to debate theology and philosophy,
Using just reason.
using reason alone as the common ground. You couldn't just quote your own scripture to win.
So it was almost treated as a high-stakes intellectual sport by the elite.
In a way, yes. It was intellectual entertainment and inquiry. Furthermore, we cannot discount his sheer practical utility.
Meaning he was a really good doctor?
Al-Razi was an undeniably brilliant life-saving physician. If you are the emir and you have severe gout or a life-threatening fever,
You do not care about your doctor's unorthodox views on prophecy.
not at all. You want the man who can cure you. His practical value to society and to the ruling elite provided him with a significant, though not absolute, shield of protection.
We might hate his theology, but let him talk because he's the only one who can save my life. That makes a lot of practical sense. But Al-Razi didn't just tear down theology, he built his own metaphysical system to replace it.
He did.
And this system centered on what he called the five eternals.
Right. If you remember, Al-Kindi used math to prove that only God is eternal and the universe was created in time.
Right, the finite time argument.
Al-Razi completely rejects this. He posits that there are five uncreated entities that have existed forever.
Five of them.
Five. God, the universal soul, first matter, absolute space, and absolute time.
Including matter, space, and time as eternal entities sitting right alongside God. That is a massive philosophical rupture.
It is huge.
Let's break down why he felt he needed these. Why couldn't he just accept creation from nothing?
Because of his empirical mindset as an alchemist and physician.
Ah, okay.
Al-Razi argued that human reason has never observed something coming from absolute nothingness.
That's fair.
If nothing in the physical world comes to be except from another pre-existing thing, then it is illogical to assume the universe itself came from nothing.
So he needs raw material.
Therefore, the raw material of the universe, first matter, must be eternal. He conceptualized this matter as being composed of indivisible atoms, which possess actual physical volume.
Which sounds remarkably like early atomic theory.
It really does.
But if you have atoms, they need a place to exist, right? And this leads to his concept of absolute space, which is, it's wild to me.
It's a very advanced idea for the time.
Because Aristotle argued that space is just the boundary of physical bodies. If there is no object, there is no space. Aristotle hated the idea of a vacuum.
You abhorred a vacuum, yes.
But Al-Razi argues for a true eternal vacuum. Why did he need absolute space?
Well, because if matter is made of atoms and atoms move and combine, they need an empty void to move through.
Right.
If space only exists where bodies exist, motion is impossible. Al-Razi argued that space exists independently of the objects within it. It is an internal receptacle.
And he actually tries to prove the physical reality of a vacuum using an experiment.
Oh, yes, the bottle experiment.
Yeah, the source text mentions he used the example of water being retained in a submerged bottle with its opening turned downwards.
Right.
He argued that the vacuum inside the bottle has an active power to attract bodies, which it feels like he is philosophically grasping at the concept of atmospheric pressure or even a primitive theory of gravity.
It's incredible. He is trying to use physics to prove metaphysics.
Exact.
His scientific empiricism completely drives his philosophy.
Yeah.
But where this deeply rationalist framework really hits the ground is his moral philosophy.
Because if you strip away religion, what's left?
Exactly. If you completely strip away revelation, heaven, hell, and divine commandments, how do you figure out how to live a good life? He had to construct an ethical system based entirely on reason and biology.
And his approach is incredibly pragmatic. I mean, in his book, Spiritual Medicine, he writes vehemently against the extremes of asceticism.
Yes.
He didn't think you should go live in a cave, wear hair shirts, and starve yourself to achieve spiritual purity.
No, he viewed that as a violation of reason. He defined the ideal philosophical life as a path of strict moderation. But his definition of pleasure is what I find most striking here.
Oh, yeah.
Unlike many philosophers who view pleasure as a positive, autonomous good to be maximized, Al-Razi viewed pleasure purely in the negative.
Meaning what?
He defined pleasure simply as a return to nature.
I found this concept fascinating. It's like moving from the punishing, scorching sun into the cool shade.
Exactly.
The pleasure isn't really the shade itself. The pleasure is the relief from the pain of the heat. It is the restoration of your body's natural baseline.
Yes, eating is a pleasure only because hunger is a pain.
Right.
If you understand pleasure as merely the removal of pain, you stop chasing extravagant, unnatural luxuries because they ultimately just create new desires and new pains.
It's a formula for profound moderation.
It really is.
And this hyper-rational view, it leads to his argument against the fear of death, too.
This is one of my favorite parts.
Right. He reasons that human beings waste massive amounts of anxiety on death. But logically, there are only two possibilities.
What are they?
Well, if there is an afterlife, and you've used your reason to live a moderate, just life, you have nothing to worry about.
Right, you're good.
But if there is nothing after death, if the soul is simply annihilated, then there is no consciousness, no pain, and therefore absolutely nothing to experience or fear.
You won't be there to be scared.
Exactly. Worrying about a state of non-existence while you are alive is an irrational waste of your current biological time.
It is a deeply stoic, almost Epicurean conclusion.
Yeah.
So to recap where we are right now,
Yeah.
Al-Kindi built the initial bridge reconciling faith and math.
Check.
Al-Razi blew it up, leaving a universe of eternal atoms, vacuums, and radical self-reliance.
Right. Total demolition.
This leaves the intellectual landscape incredibly fractured. To fix this, our next philosopher steps onto the stage with an ambition to map the entire cosmos and put every single piece back together.
Enter Al-Farabi, the ultimate cosmic synthesizer.
Al-Farabi is a monumental figure. He is universally known in the Islamic philosophical tradition as the second teacher.
The second teacher. The first teacher being Aristotle himself, right?
Exactly. He lived slightly later, dying around 950. And the contrast between his intellectual ambition and his personal life is striking.
How so?
Well, he spent much of his later life in the brilliant, wealthy royal court of Saif al-Dawla in Aleppo. But unlike Al-Kindi with his exotic animals, Al-Farabi completely ignored the glamour.
He wasn't living it up.
Not at all. The sources describe him living a quiet, ascetic, Sufi-like existence.
And we should probably clarify what Sufi-like means in this specific context.
Yes, good point. It implies a life of deep mystical contemplation, material renunciation, and a focus on internal spiritual purification, often wearing simple woolen garb, which is actually the root of the word Sufi.
Okay, so he's not chasing courtly titles or wealth.
No, his singular mission was intellectual synthesis.
Synthesis on a scale that is honestly hard to comprehend.
It's massive.
He looked at the works of Plato, the works of Aristotle, and the tenets of Islamic theology, and decided that they were all fundamentally saying the exact same thing.
He strongly believed that philosophy is essentially one single unit. Truth is one.
Just one truth.
Yes. He thought that the different schools of thought, the Platonists, the Aristotelians, the Stoics, they were just engaged in partisan bickering over the same fundamental reality.
So why were they arguing so much?
He blamed their fanatical, less intelligent disciples for widening the gaps by stressing minor shades of difference in vocabulary.
Oh, getting caught up in the weeds.
Exactly. Al-Farabi's goal was to weave everything into one unified system. And to do that, he developed this massive top-down cosmic map known as the theory of the 10 intelligences.
Okay, I want to spend some time breaking down this cosmic map because it is complex, it is beautiful, and honestly, the mechanics of it are a bit confusing at first glance.
It takes a minute to wrap your head around, for sure.
So it all starts with God, whom he calls the One.
Right. God is the necessary being. God is absolutely simple, perfect, and unique. There is no multiplicity in God whatsoever.
Okay, I'm with you.
But here's the philosophical puzzle. If God is perfectly simple and unchanging, how does a complex, changing universe come from him?
Right.
Al-Farabi's answer is emanation, from God's own self-knowledge. Simply by contemplating his own perfection, a second entity effortlessly emanates or overflows.
Okay.
This is the first intelligence.
Okay, wait, stop right there, because this is where I struggled with the text.
Let's hear it.
God is one. From God, only one thing can emanate, because if two things emanated, God wouldn't be perfectly simple.
Right. That's the Neoplatonic rule, yeah.
So we get the first intelligence, but how do we get from the first intelligence to the rest of the universe? If the first intelligence is just one thing, how does it split into many things?
That is the exact pressure point of the theory. And Al-Farabi solves this by introducing the concept of the dual nature of the possible being.
It's a dual nature.
Yes. God is the only necessary being. The first intelligence is a possible being. It owes its existence to God.
Okay.
Because it owes its existence to another, it has a dual nature. It contemplates God, which is its source, and it contemplates itself, its own possible nature.
Oh, I see. So the act of contemplating God creates one thing, and the act of contemplating itself creates another thing.
Exactly. You've got it. From its higher aspect, contemplating God, it generates the second intelligence.
Right.
From its lower aspect, contemplating its own finite nature, It generates the highest celestial sphere, the physical heavens.
Wow, okay.
This cascading process of emanation continues down the line. The second generates the third generates the fourth, alongside the spheres of the stars, Saturn, Jupiter, down through the planets, until you reach the final level.
The 10th intelligence.
The 10th intelligence, the bottom rung of the cosmic ladder, but arguably the most important one for us down here on Earth.
Indeed. This 10th intelligence is known as the agent intelligence, or the active intellect.
It is the intelligence that manages and governs our earthly, sublunary world. It is the crucial bridge between the perfect heavenly spheres and messy human minds.
The source text uses this brilliant analogy to explain how the agent intelligence interacts with us.
The sun analogy.
Yes, comparing it to the sun. So if you think about human eyes, they have the biological potential to see.
Right.
But if you put a person in a pitch-black cave, they are functionally blind. They need the sun's light to illuminate the objects so the physical eye can actually perceive them.
Yes. Al-Farabi says our human intellect is exactly like that eye in the dark.
Okay.
We have the potential to understand abstract concepts, but our minds are dark. We need the agent intelligence to shine its intellectual light onto our minds, illuminating the forms and ideas so that we can actually perceive truth.
It's a gorgeous metaphor, but I have a serious bone to pick with Al-Farabi here.
Okay, lay it on me.
If our minds are just sitting in the dark, entirely dependent on this cosmic 10th intelligence to shine a light on us before we can understand anything, doesn't this make the human mind incredibly passive?
Ah.
I mean, it makes us sound like biological radio receivers just sitting around waiting for a cosmic signal to tell us what's true. Where is human agency in all this?
That is a very astute critique, and it's one that later philosophers wrestled with heavily. Is human thought just a passive reception of cosmic radiation?
Right.
But Al-Farabi would defend himself by pointing to the grueling mechanics of how we receive that light. He breaks the human intellect down into hierarchical levels.
Okay, walk me through those levels.
You start with the potential intellect.
Yeah.
This is the raw capacity you were born with.
Like the eye in the dark.
Exactly. But you don't just sit there. You have to study, you have to observe the physical world, you have to abstract ideas from matter. Through extreme intellectual effort, you elevate your mind to the active intellect.
So there is work involved.
Massive agency. But the absolute highest level, achieved only by the greatest philosophers and prophets, is the acquired intellect.
The acquired intellect.
Yes. This isn't passive receiving. Only when a person has completely perfected their rational faculties and their moral character can their soul rise up and achieve a direct, illuminating communion with the agent intelligence.
Oh, wow.
It is an active striving upward, not just a passive waiting. For the philosopher, this communion happens through rigorous logical contemplation.
Oh, okay.
But for the prophet, it happens through a different faculty entirely, the imagination.
Right. And this is how Al-Farabi answers Al-Razi's rejection of prophecy.
Okay.
Because Al-Razi said prophecy was an irrational scam. But Al-Farabi says, no, prophecy is a highly advanced, scientifically explainable psychological and cosmological event.
Yes.
It relies on a supreme imagination.
He argues that a prophet is an individual whose imaginative faculty is so extraordinarily powerful that it functions not just when they are asleep, but when they are wide awake.
That sounds intense.
It is. They commune with the agent intelligence, they receive pure divine truths, and then, crucially, their supreme imagination immediately translates those abstract truths into vivid symbols, visions, and scripture.
So they translate the math into a story.
Exactly, a story that the common people can actually understand and follow.
And the source text points out a really fascinating detail about his theory of the imagination, specifically regarding dreams.
Oh, the psychoanalysis part.
Yes. Al-Farabi notes that when our physical senses shut down in sleep, the imagination takes over.
Right.
But he notes that the imagination is heavily influenced by our physical state or our repressed emotions.
Yes, his psychological insight here is strikingly modern. The text explicitly points out that if you have a humid temperament, your imagination will construct dreams of water.
Oh, wow.
Or your dreams might represent the fulfillment of a suppressed desire, or the avoidance of a deep fear, which can cause you to physically thrash around in bed.
The source text actually compares this directly to modern psychoanalysis. It mentions Sigmund Freud, Karen Horney, and Henry Murray.
Right.
Al-Farabi was essentially doing 10th century psychoanalysis to explain the mechanics of how prophets process revelation.
He recognized that the unconscious mind is a powerful engine for processing information.
It's wild.
By linking this psychological mechanism of the imagination to the cosmological reality of the agent intelligence, He managed to validate the religious reality of prophecy while keeping it grounded in a rational, scientific framework.
He brought it all together.
He successfully synthesized the Greek intellect with the Islamic prophet.
Okay, so Al-Farabi gives us this massive top-down cosmic map where everything flows from God down through the spheres to the 10th intelligence, which beams truth into our highly prepared brains.
A breathtaking intellectual achievement.
It truly is. But I have to ask,
Yeah.
how does that actually help you and me live a better life on a random Tuesday?
It doesn't, really. It's incredibly abstract.
Right. So for practical ground-level application, we need to turn to our fourth thinker, Miskawayh.
Miskawayh is a wonderful pivot. He died around 1030, and unlike the sweeping metaphysical architects we just discussed, Miskawayh was fundamentally a historian and a moralist.
Okay.
Though it is worth noting that, like Al-Razi, he spent his youth deeply engaged in alchemy, literally chasing gold.
Trying to get rich.
Yes, but he eventually had an epiphany that true wealth wasn't chemical, it was moral character.
He completely transformed his own life. The sources note he subjected himself to a strict 15-point moral code to cure himself of his own character flaws.
He practiced his own medicine.
He did. And as a historian, his view of the world was shockingly modern.
Very ahead of his time.
He didn't just write down chronological tales of kings, battles, and dates.
Yeah.
He viewed history as a dynamic mirror of socioeconomic structures.
He believed history should be utilized as a tool to understand the causal determinants of human behavior. Why do societies rise? Why do they fall? That historical genetic mindset deeply influenced his philosophy. When Miskawayh looked at the natural world, he didn't just see static categories. He saw a continuous process of development.
He saw an evolutionary chain.
Yes.
This is one of the most surprising facts in the entire deep dive, honestly. Hundreds of years before Charles Darwin, Miskawayh is writing in detail about an evolutionary process.
It's incredible to read.
But unlike Darwinian evolution, which is driven by, random mutation and natural selection,
Right.
Miskawayh's evolution is driven by a teleological spiritual urge. It's an urge to return to God.
Exactly. The mechanism is completely different, but the observation of species bridging into one another is remarkable.
How does he outline it?
He outlines a clear progression. He says the mineral kingdom evolves, becoming more complex until it reaches its highest form, which he identifies as coral.
Because coral is a mineral, but it grows and branches like a plant. So it acts as the bridge to the vegetable kingdom.
Precisely. Then the vegetable kingdom evolves. And the highest form of the vegetable kingdom, according to Miskawayh, is the date palm.
The date palm, why that?
He notes that the date palm requires distinct genders for fertilization and seems to have a center of life akin to a primitive brain.
Oh, that's fascinating.
This date palm bridges the gap to the animal kingdom. Then the animal kingdom evolves in complexity, gaining motion and higher senses. And what is the highest form of the animal kingdom?
The ape. He explicitly names the ape as the bridge to the human being.
He does. He notes the ape shares almost all physical and psychological traits with humans, lacking only higher intellect and speech.
Wow.
And then the human being evolves morally and intellectually until the chain culminates in the supreme human, the prophet. It is an evolutionary ladder of being, driven by a cosmic desire for perfection.
And because he views humanity as part of this developmental process, his ethics are entirely focused on how we climb that final human realm. How do we reach our highest potential? He takes the classic Platonic virtues, wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice, and he maps them out with microscopic precision.
He really gets into the weeds.
For instance, he breaks the concept of justice down into 19 distinct species.
19.
When I read that, I couldn't help but wonder why you need 19 subcategories of justice.
It seems like overkill.
But it shows his obsession with practical application. He wants to know exactly what justice looks like in commerce, in law, in family life, in personal habit.
What Miskawayh is doing is creating a practical hygiene for the soul. He treats moral failings as psychological diseases that need specific targeted cures.
When I read Miskawayh, I think of him as the medieval inventor of cognitive behavioral therapy.
CBT. That's a great comparison.
Right. He is giving actionable advice to change your neural pathways.
Give me an example.
For example, he says you shouldn't rely on your friends to point out your character flaws.
Why not?
Because friends love you, they will flatter you, or they will make excuses for your bad behavior.
That is very true.
If you want to know what's genuinely wrong with you, you should listen to your enemies. An enemy will not hesitate for a second to tell you exactly where you are failing.
It is brilliant psychological advice. This raises a crucial question about the nature of human interaction in Miskawai's philosophy.
Yeah.
Like Al-Razi, Miskawai vehemently rejected the ascetic, isolated life.
Okay.
You cannot go live in a cave, avoid all human contact, and call yourself a good person.
Right, he asks. How can a man who retires from the world be just, generous, or courageous?
You can't.
If you never interact with anyone, you can't practice justice. If you have no money, you can't practice generosity. He says an isolated ascetic is basically just a dead rock.
For Miskawai, virtue absolutely requires society. You can only practice temperance or courage in relation to the temptations and dangers posed by other people. We are civil by nature.
He goes so far as to say that people who preach complete renunciation of the world are actually being deeply iniquitous and unjust.
That's a strong word, unjust.
Because even a hermit requires the services of others to survive. Someone has to grow the little food they eat or weave the simple clothing they wear.
Right. They aren't totally self-sufficient.
The hermit consumes the labor of society but offers absolutely no service in return. That is the definition of injustice.
Exactly. You are part of the evolutionary chain. You are part of the socioeconomic structure, so you must participate.
Right.
And this deeply social view of ethics leads to his beautiful hierarchy of love.
Tell me about the hierarchy.
He argues that affection is the natural binding source of unity in any society. And he divides love into specific categories based on his evolutionary mindset.
What are those categories?
First is animal love, which is driven purely by physical pleasure or immediate need. It is natural, but it is fleeting and unstable.
Makes sense.
Second is spiritual love, which is based on shared virtue and goodness between people. This is stable and lasting. But the absolute highest form of love in Miskawai's system is the love of a disciple for a master.
Why is a student's love for a teacher the highest form?
Because while parents give you physical life, the master educates your soul.
Oh, wow.
The master provides the wisdom that guides your soul to eternal life. It is the love that pulls you up the final rung of the evolutionary ladder toward the divine.
It is an incredibly warm, human-centric philosophy. He's saying, look, we evolved from the earth. We are bound together in this messy society, so let's use our reason to treat each other justly, cure our psychological diseases, and pull each other upward.
He truly brought philosophy down from the celestial spheres of Al-Farabi and planted it firmly in the soil of human relationships.
He did, but, in the history of ideas, philosophy never stays grounded for long.
No, it certainly doesn't.
We've journeyed through Al-Kindi's mathematical harmony, Al-Razi's radical logic, Al-Farabi's cosmic architecture, and Miskawai's practical evolutionary ethics.
I've covered a lot of ground.
Finally, we arrive at the man who took all of these disparate threads, absorbed all of their brilliant insights, and wove them into an impenetrable, bulletproof metaphysical system that would dominate the world for centuries. We arrive at Ibn Sina.
Famously known in the Western world as Avicenna.
Avicenna, yes.
Ibn Sina, who lived from 980 to 1037, is an absolute titan. It is hard to overstate his influence.
Huge.
His philosophical system was so comprehensive, so rigorously argued, that it not only dominated the Islamic world, but when it was translated into Latin, it directly shaped Western scholasticism.
Really?
Oh, yeah. If you read Thomas Aquinas, his entire theological framework regarding the nature of God owes a massive structural debt to Ibn Sina.
So he was the ultimate architect.
Yes.
And his core method, the engine of his philosophy, was based on strict division and distinction.
Let's hear it.
His golden rule was basically this: to every clear concept, there must correspond a distinction in reality.
Okay.
If you can clearly separate two ideas in your mind, they must represent two different ontological realities in the universe.
And he applied this rule of distinction to solve the biggest, most glaring problem left over from Aristotle.
Which was?
As we discussed earlier, Aristotle said everything in the physical world is made of two things: form and matter. The form is the definition or the blueprint, like treeness, and the matter is the physical wood and leaves.
But Ibn Sina looked at that Aristotelian formula and said, hold on, form and matter explain what a thing is. They define its nature.
Yes.
But they do absolutely nothing to explain why that thing actually exists.
Precisely. And this is Ibn Sina's greatest, most revolutionary contribution to global philosophy. The absolute distinction between essence and existence.
Essence and existence.
Yes. Essence answers the question, what is it? Existence answers the question, is it?
This is a tricky concept, but the source text uses an incredibly helpful analogy to explain it.
The elephant one.
Yes. Imagine an Eskimo who has lived his entire life in the freezing Arctic. He has never seen an elephant. He doesn't even know what the word means.
Okay.
Now, I sit down with him, and I describe an elephant in perfect detail. I tell him it's a massive gray mammal. It has a long prehensile trunk, big floppy ears, and tusks made of ivory.
A very clear picture.
Right. By the end of my description, I have perfectly conveyed the essence of an elephant. The Eskimo now understands exactly what an elephant is.
Yes.
But just because he perfectly understands the essence, that doesn't mean he knows that elephants actually walk the earth. He might think I just described a mythical creature like a dragon. The essence of the elephant does not contain its own existence.
Exactly. Ibn Sina argues that existence has to be added to the essence from the outside.
From the outside.
Existence is a separate ingredient. In his terminology, existence is an accident that happens to the essence.
Oh, wow.
And this rule applies to absolutely everything in the universe. You, me, the stars, the date palms, the atoms. Our essence does not guarantee our existence. We are merely possible beings.
Okay.
Our existence is contingent. It is borrowed.
But here's the logical trap then.
What's the trap?
If everything in the universe is just a possible being, and our existence has to be added to us from the outside, where does the existence come from?
Ah, yes.
You can't have an infinite chain of possible beings borrowing existence from other possible beings, because eventually someone has to actually own the existence.
And that leads to his ultimate conclusion.
Right.
The existence must come from the one and only being in the entire universe whose essence and existence are exactly the same thing.
God.
God. For God to be what he is that he is. God's very definition is existence.
Wow.
God is the necessary being. Therefore, God is the ultimate existentializing agency. God is the infinite reservoir of existence, continuously pouring existence into the empty essences of all other possible things, making them real moment by moment.
It is such an elegant, structurally flawless solution. It proves God's existence not just as a distant first cause who kicked off motion at the beginning of time, but as the continuous, necessary ground of all reality right now.
Beautiful.
But I have to push back on Ibn Sina's rule about concepts.
Okay, let's hear the pushback.
He said, to every clear concept, there must correspond a distinction in reality. If I talk about a spaceship or a unicorn, I have a clear concept in my mind. I am using words that have meaning, but they don't have existence in the real world.
Right.
Does a unicorn possess some kind of, shadow existence just because I can think about it? How does Ibn Sina deal with things that don't exist?
That is a brilliant philosophical trap, and it's a trap that many philosophers actually fell into.
Really?
Oh, yeah. There is a view which modern philosophers often refer to as the Monongian view, named after a 19th century Austrian philosopher. But it was a debate heavily present in medieval times as well, which suggests that if we can talk meaningfully about non-existent things, they must exist in some weird, abstract realm of non-being.
Otherwise, we'd just be talking about empty noise.
Exactly.
Right, so the unicorn must exist in the realm of ideas so that my sentence about a unicorn makes sense.
Well, Ibn Sina and I had zero patience for this.
Oh, he hated it.
Completely. The source text notes his scathing, highly technical critique of this idea. He essentially called it utter nonsense.
How did he debunk it?
He argued that we can talk about unicorns or spaceships because we construct their essences in our minds by combining other real concepts we've abstracted from the world.
Oh, I see.
We take the concept of a horse and the concept of a horn, and we fuse them. We give them a purely conceptual existence in the mind.
But conceptual existence does not equal objective reality.
Exactly. For Ibn Sina, objective external existence isn't just a physical property like weight or color. It is a unique, direct relationship to the divine creative act.
Right.
If the necessary being hasn't poured existence into that specific essence, it remains purely a mental fiction. You cannot think a unicorn into objective reality just because your concept is clear.
He really was the great architectural synthesizer, wasn't he?
He really was.
He tied up the loose ends of Greek thought-solving, Aristotelic form and matter problem and aligned it perfectly with the theological necessity of a God who actively sustains the universe.
A monumental achievement.
Okay, let's take a deep breath and recap this incredible intellectual journey.
It's been a long road.
We started with the problem of reconciling strict logic with deeply held belief. Al-Kindi attacked it first, using the strict geometric proofs of mathematics to build a bridge, proving that time is finite and revelation matches philosophy.
Then we met Al-Razi, the rebellious rationalist and physician. He pointed out the flaws in that bridge, rejected prophecy entirely, and argued for a universe governed by reason, eternal matter, and an absolute vacuum, demanding we find our ethics through moderation and a return to nature.
Then we looked at Al-Farabi, the cosmic synthesizer, who rebuilt the architecture of the universe with the beautiful hierarchy of the 10 intelligences. He explained prophecy not as magic, but as the supreme human imagination communing with the ancient intelligence.
From those celestial heights, we grounded ourselves with Miskawai, the moral evolutionist, who taught us that life is a developmental chain from mineral to ape to human, that virtue absolutely requires society, and he mapped out a practical cognitive hygiene for the soul.
And finally, we scaled the summit with Ibn Sina, the architectural genius who separated essence from existence, proving logically that all reality depends continuously on the one necessary being.
It's a staggering amount of intellectual firepower to process.
It really is. But before we sign off today, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over this week. It circles back to the core belief of Al-Farabi.
Oh, I like it.
Remember his central thesis? He believed there is fundamentally only one truth. He believed that all the different, fiercely warring philosophical and theological schools were essentially trying to describe the exact same reality, but they were blinded by their own partisan bickering, their egos, and minor differences in their vocabulary.
Right.
As you go about your week in our modern era, an era defined by extreme information overload, by bitter, intractable political divides, and impenetrable partisan echo chambers, ask yourself this. How many of our most vicious disagreements today are actually just different words for the exact same truth? Are we, just like the fanatical disciples of the ancient Greeks, completely missing the unified reality because we are too busy fighting over the vocabulary?
It's a profound question, and I think it proves that these medieval thinkers are still intensely, urgently relevant to our lives today. They weren't just debating angels on pinheads. They were mapping the human condition.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. As these 5 brilliant philosophers proved, whether you are using a geometric proof, analyzing the psychology of a dream, charting an evolutionary chain, or dividing essence from existence, the pursuit of knowledge is the ultimate human adventure. We may be looking at a landscape of incredibly muddy waters, but with the right tools and a willingness to question our own assumptions, the truth is in there waiting to be found.
So, in the year 1138, the prime minister of the city of Saragossa was poisoned to death by a rival physician.
Right, which sounds like, standard medieval politics.
Exactly, yeah. You'd think it was just a typical political power grab or some illicit scandal.
Yeah.
But his assassination didn't happen because of that at all.
No, not at all.
He was murdered, fundamentally, because of how he believed the human mind ought to function.
Yeah.
Which is wild.
It really is.
He genuinely believed that if you want to find absolute, objective truth, you have to completely and ruthlessly isolate yourself from human society.
Yeah, total isolation.
Right. And today,
Yeah.
we might casually call that, logging off or going off the grid to touch grass or whatever.
Sure.
But 1,000 years ago, it was a philosophical stance so threatening to the social order that it could literally get you killed.
Yeah, and it's a really stark reminder that we often suffer from a severe historical blind spot, I think.
Oh, 100%.
Because we look at our modern era, right? We're surrounded by digital noise and algorithmic echo chambers. It's this exhausting struggle to separate fact from fiction. And we just assume that information overload is this uniquely 21st century crisis.
Right, like we invented it.
Exactly. But it is not. The desperate fight to protect objective knowledge from, societal corruption or dogmatic thinking, that's ancient.
Yeah.
And the frameworks that were designed to cut through all that noise, they were forged in this incredibly volatile crucible of the 12th and 13th centuries.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive.
Right.
Because we have this stack of historical texts detailing the golden age of Islamic philosophy.
Some really incredible material.
Really incredible. And we're going to be specifically focusing on 4 titans of human thought. That's Ibn Bajjah, Ibn Tufail, Ibn Rushd, who is often known in the West as Averroes, and Nasir al-Din Tusi.
Right.
And I want to be clear to everyone listening, we aren't just doing some boring roll call of dead philosophers here.
No, definitely not.
We are going to extract the literal blueprints of the scientific method, the origins of cognitive psychology, and the actual mechanics of human reason itself.
And to really understand these ideas, you have to understand the environment that produced them.
Yeah, set the stage for us.
So our source material tracks this massive geographic and chronological sweep. We're talking across Spain, North Africa, and Persia.
A huge area.
Huge. And we are looking at a period where the Islamic world was the undisputed global center of intellectual gravity, you know?
Right.
But it was also politically fragmenting, very violently in some cases.
Which makes it so dangerous.
Exactly. These thinkers were translating and evolving ancient Greek texts, specifically Aristotle and Plato, but they were simultaneously navigating intensely dangerous political and religious turmoil.
It wasn't just ivory tower stuff.
Not at all. Their philosophies were not abstract thought experiments. They were literal survival mechanisms.
I really want to trace the evolution of thought across these four thinkers for you guys, because there is this very clear logical progression here.
There really is.
We start with this idea that physical isolation is the only way to think clearly. Then we move into this radical thought experiment about, well, what if someone was raised entirely outside of society?
Right, the blank slate.
Exactly. And from there, we hit this desperate legal defense of science itself. And finally, we end up with the actual institutionalization of knowledge to cure literal diseases of the human soul.
It's an amazing arc.
It really is.
Yeah.
So let's begin with the architect of that first stage, the guy who was poisoned in 1138.
Right, Abu Bakr Muhammad ibn Yahya as-Assay.
It's a long one.
It is, but he was known to his contemporaries as Ibn Bajjah and to the Latin-speaking West as Avempace.
Well,
He was born in Saragossa in the region of Al-Andalusia, modern-day Spain, in the late 11th century. And to grasp his philosophy, you first have to really grasp the sheer intimidating force of his intellect.
yeah, and the sources offer this one anecdote that I think just perfectly encapsulates his personality.
Oh, the mosque story.
Yes. It takes place in a mosque in Granada. Ibn Bajjah is a stranger in town, and he walks in on a grammarian giving a lesson to this group of young elite students.
Right.
And the students take one look at this newcomer, this stranger, and immediately decide to mock him.
Typical students.
Seriously. They ask him, highly condescendingly,
Yeah.
what does the jurist carry? What science has he excelled in?
And context here is really crucial because in medieval Islamic society, Arabic grammar wasn't just about, knowing where to put a comma.
It was a big deal.
It was everything. It was the foundational science required to interpret the Quran, Islamic law, poetry. To master grammar was to essentially hold the keys to the intellectual and religious kingdom.
Wow.
So these students were essentially demanding to see his intellectual credentials, fully expecting him to just be some uneducated peasant.
But instead of backing down, Ibn Bajjah just replies, look here, I am carrying 12,000 dinar under my armpit.
Which is a massive fortune.
Huge.
Yeah.
And he reveals 12 exquisite, highly valuable pearls. He tells them these pearls represent the 12 different sciences he has mastered. And then he proceeds to just casually deconstruct their entire lesson.
He absolutely destroys them.
Yeah, he drops the exact lineages of their grammatical theories, entirely dismantles their arguments, and proves, on the spot, that he understands their own elite subject way better than they do.
And the historical texts actually note that the students were so intellectually shattered by this that they begged for his forgiveness.
I mean, I would too.
Right, but it just demonstrates his staggering polymathic ability because even historians who vehemently hated him, who actively accused him of heresy later on, they could not deny his genius.
He was just that smart.
He really was. He was a master of literature, ancient philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, you name it.
But that level of brilliance, combined with, let's be honest, that level of arrogance,
Yeah.
that made him a massive target.
Oh, absolutely.
Because he rose to the rank of vizier, essentially prime minister, multiple times, first in Saragossa and later in Fez. But the political climate was incredibly unstable.
Very volatile. The Almoravid dynasty was losing its grip.
Right, cities were falling, and rival factions were constantly weaponizing accusations of heresy to eliminate political threats.
Yeah, heresy was the ultimate political weapon.
Exactly. So Ibn Bajjah was imprisoned, he survived multiple assassination attempts, and ultimately fell victim to that poisoned dish in Fez.
Right, and his life was just this constant navigation of hostility, and that hostility directly birthed his most famous political and ethical theory, which is outlined in a treatise called Tadbir al-Mutawahid.
Which translates to the regime of the solitary.
Exactly. Now, philosophically, Ibn Bajjah was an Aristotelian. He relied heavily on the earlier works of Al-Farabi.
Okay.
But where his contemporaries were increasingly trying to blend strict logical philosophy with religious mysticism, relying on spiritual intuition, Ibn Bajjah drew a very hard line.
He was not into the mysticism.
Not at all. He argued that ultimate objective truth could only be reached through speculative reason and the intellect alone.
And the regime of the solitary is basically his survival guide for anyone trying to do that.
Yes, precisely.
He looks at his society, a society that is corrupt, chaotic, driven by animalistic desires and political backstabbing.
Sound familiar.
Right. And he concludes that society is an active physical impediment to pure reason. The noise of the crowd literally pulls the intellect down. So the true philosopher must become this solitary man.
Right. He argues that the penetrative thinker must keep completely aloof from people to achieve perfection.
Total quarantine.
Essentially, the solitary individual should only interact with the community for absolute, unavoidable necessities.
Like buying food.
Yeah, acquiring food, basic economic transactions. But otherwise, the mind just has to be quarantined from the irrationality of the masses.
See, I struggle with this a bit. I mean, I understand the urge to retreat. It's kind of the core of modern digital minimalism or, deep work, right?
Sure.
Shut your door, turn off the internet, focus. But Ibn Bajjah isn't just talking about being productive. He's talking about objective reality.
Right.
Doesn't total isolation breed madness? I mean, if you don't test your ideas against other minds, how do you know you aren't just building an echo chamber of one?
That is a very modern psychological critique, and it's a fair one. But it misses the mechanical way Ibn Bajjah believed the universe actually functioned.
Okay, lay it on me.
He grounds his need for isolation in Aristotelian physics, specifically the concepts of form and matter.
Form and matter.
Yeah. In this framework, every physical object is a combination of matter, which is the physical stuff it's made of, and form, which is the blueprint or the defining essence of the thing.
Right. Okay, so the matter of a chair is wood, but the form is the concept of a chair, like something you sit on with a back and legs.
Precisely. And Ibn Bajjah argues that human perception works in stages. When you look at a specific physical chair, your physical senses take in the material form.
Got it.
But human beings possess a rational faculty that can strip away the messy physical matter. You ignore the scratches on the wood, the specific color, and you abstract the pure universal form of a chair in your mind.
Okay, I follow that.
So the ultimate goal of human existence, for Ibn Bajjah, is to elevate the mind so thoroughly that it only contemplates these pure universal forms entirely divorced from physical matter.
Okay, but how does isolating yourself actually help you do that? I mean, if you lock yourself in a room, you're still just thinking about the physical things you remember, right?
And this is where we introduce the concept of the active intellect.
The active intellect.
Yes. For Ibn Bajjah, the human mind only has the potential to understand universal forms. It requires an activating force from outside itself.
Like a battery.
Almost. He uses a very specific mechanical analogy. The light of the sun. Imagine a dark room with objects in it. You have eyes, so you have the potential to see, but without light, you see nothing.
Okay, yeah.
The sun's light must fall on the objects to make them visible to the physical eye.
Oh, I see. So the active intellect is kind of like a metaphysical sun.
That is exactly it. The active intellect is a universal divine force that constantly flows over the rational faculty of the human mind. It illuminates universal truths so the mind's eye can perceive them. He actually writes that through this light, one realizes and sees the creation of God.
Okay, but what does that have to do with being alone?
Well, this is the crucial mechanism behind his isolation. If you are constantly bombarded by the sensory input, the emotional dramas, and the false opinions of a corrupt society,
You get distracted.
worse than distracted, you are essentially throwing dust into the air of that dark room. You obscure the light.
Oh.
So the regime of the solitary is not about avoiding people just because they're annoying. It is about eliminating physical interference so that the active intellect can successfully transmit universal forms into your mind.
Okay, that reframes it completely for me. It's not misanthropy at all. It's like signal optimization.
Yes, signal optimization.
He's just trying to tune out the static so he can hear the frequency of the universe.
It is a rigorously logical system. However, his successors almost immediately spotted the massive structural flaw in this theory.
There's always a flaw.
Always. If society is the primary mechanism of corruption, and the solitary man must spend his whole life trying to unlearn societal conditioning,
Yeah.
well, what happens if we remove society from the equation entirely, right from the moment of birth?
Oh, wow. Because if the active intellect is always shining, a human being raised completely alone should logically become like a perfect intellectual machine.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the second giant of this era, Ibn Tufail. Now, he was a younger contemporary of Ibn Bajjah, living in the 12th century in Al-Andalus.
Right.
He was a court physician and a vizier. But he looked at Ibn Bajjah's cold, isolated logic and found it deeply lacking.
He did, because Ibn Tufail sought to bridge a massive ideological divide of his time.
What was the divide?
Well, on one side, you had Ibn Bajjah's strict rationalism. On the other, you had the intense spiritual mysticism of thinkers like Al-Ghazali.
Okay.
Al-Ghazali believed truth was found through intuitive religious ecstasy, not just logical deduction.
Right.
So Ibn Tufail wanted to synthesize these two approaches, and rather than writing, dense, impenetrable philosophical treatise, he chose a highly accessible medium. He wrote a philosophical romance, a novel entitled Hey Bin Yatsan.
And the premise of this book is arguably one of the most brilliant thought experiments in the history of literature.
It's fantastic.
So the setup is this. A child named Hey comes into existence on a completely deserted, uninhabited island somewhere near the equator.
And the sources actually detail two conflicting narratives for how Hay arrives on this
I
island.
love this part.
Yeah, and both are philosophically significant. The first is a traditional sort of legendary narrative.
Yeah.
A princess on a neighboring civilized island secretly marries and has a child.
Right.
To hide her transgression, she places the infant in a sealed ark and casts him into the sea, trusting God to protect him. And the currents wash him ashore on the deserted island.
It's the classic Moses and the bulrushes trope. It's very familiar.
It is.
But the second version is just wild because it's essentially a medieval attempt at evolutionary biology.
Exactly. Ibn Tufail borrows the second version from the earlier Persian philosopher Avicenna. It's the theory of spontaneous generation.
Spontaneous generation.
Yeah. The text proposes that in the perfect climate of the equator, the clay of the earth actually fermented.
Just fermented mud.
Right. The elements of hot, cold, wet, and dry achieved such a perfect harmonic balance in this mud that it became capable of receiving a human soul from the active intellect.
That is so sci-fi.
It really is. The mud bubbles, a membrane forms, organs develop, and a human infant is naturally generated by the earth itself.
But honestly, whether he floats there in a box or bubbles out of the mud, the functional point of the thought experiment is the same for the reader, right?
Exactly.
Hay is a blank slate. He has no parents, no language, no society, no culture, and no religion. He is completely unconditioned.
He's pure potential.
Right. So a mother roe deer who has lost her own fawn hears him crying, nurses him, and raises him. And from this starting point, Ibn Tufail meticulously tracks the stages of human cognitive development, relying solely on unadulterated nature.
And the first stage Hay undergoes is strictly empirical and emotional, driven by physical vulnerability.
Because he's just a weak little human.
Right. As he grows, he observes that the animals around him are naturally equipped for survival. They have fur for warmth, horns for defense, swift legs for escape.
And he's got nothing.
Nothing. Hay realizes he is naked, slow, and defenseless, but he also realizes he possesses something they do not, which are hands.
Right, so he starts manipulating his environment. He weaves leaves for clothes, he shapes branches into spears, he uses his intellect to compensate for his physical weakness.
Exactly.
But then, Ibn Tufail hits us with this deeply emotional catalyst. His mother, the roe deer, grows old and dies.
And this death is the inciting incident of his philosophical awakening.
It changes everything.
It does. Hay is paralyzed by grief, obviously, but more importantly, he is paralyzed by confusion.
Right, he doesn't understand death.
No. He looks at his mother's body. She is completely intact. There are no visible wounds. No predators have attacked her. So why won't she move?
It doesn't make sense to him.
Right. Driven by this intense empirical need to understand what is broken inside her, he decides to dissect her body.
He literally invents anatomy to process his grief, which is amazing.
It is a stunning depiction of the scientific method in action. He opens her chest cavity, examining the organs. He eventually reaches the heart and opens it, finding one of the chambers empty.
Okay.
And through basic deductive reasoning, he concludes that whatever animated her, whatever made her run and eat and love him, was not the physical flesh itself.
The flesh is just a shell.
Exactly. The true essence of his mother, the animating principle, resided in that cavity and has now departed. So he has empirically discovered the concept of the animal soul.
So he starts looking past the physical matter.
Yeah.
And this pushes him into the second massive stage of his development, which is the realm of intellect and induction.
Right.
He stops just trying to survive and starts actively categorizing the entire universe around him.
We see him deploy the inductive method, moving from specific observations to broader
Okay,
generalizations.
give us an example.
Well, he observes minerals, plants, and animals. He notices that all physical bodies share certain properties, but they behave differently. A stone will always fall. Smoke will always rise.
Right.
He deduces that there must be invisible forms or natures driving these behaviors.
But he doesn't stop there.
Yeah.
He looks at the continuous cycle of birth, death, and decay on the island. Things are constantly coming into existence and being destroyed.
Right.
So he reasons that every effect must have a cause. But that chain of material causes can't just go backwards into infinity, right? There has to be a starting point.
Yes. Through sheer logical deduction, just watching the physical mechanics of his island,
Yeah.
he concludes that there must exist an ultimate uncaused cause.
An uncaused cause.
A necessary being that is immaterial, eternal, and responsible for the existence of everything else.
Wow.
And then he looks at the night sky, he observes the perfect, cyclical, mathematical motion of the stars and planets, and he realizes this universe is not chaotic. It's a meticulously ordered system.
So the creator must be ordered too.
Exactly. Therefore, the uncaused cause must also possess infinite wisdom and perfection.
That's incredible.
Without a single holy book, without a single prophet, Hay has deduced the existence of a perfect creator.
He achieves monotheism purely through physics and biology.
Yes, he does.
And this realization sparks the third stage, spiritual discipline. Because once he realizes this perfect creator exists, his only desire is to connect with it. So he develops a rigorous 3-point behavioral code.
And notice how this code mimics religious rituals, but it's entirely derived from nature.
Right.
1.
Yeah.
He imitates the lower animals. He recognizes he has a physical body that must be sustained, but he only eats the absolute minimum required to survive.
Okay, so he's not greedy.
Exactly. Ensuring he does not disrupt the ecological balance of the island.
And then point 2. He imitates the celestial bodies. He looks at the stars, sees their purity and their continuous orbits.
Right.
So he keeps his body and his clothes immaculately clean, and he literally orbits his island. He walks the perimeter, removing obstacles, untangling plants, acting as a caretaker to ensure the harmony of his world.
And finally, point 3, he attempts to imitate the attributes of God himself.
How does he do that?
Recognizing that God is entirely immaterial, Hay seeks to strip away his own physical consciousness.
Oh, wow.
He retreats into a cave, spinning in circles, which is very reminiscent of Sufi whirling dervishes, focusing his mind entirely on the pure, incorporeal essence of the necessary being.
How does it work?
It does. Eventually, he achieves it. He reaches a state of profound, mystical ecstasy, this beatific vision where he is entirely annihilated in the contemplation of the truth.
He basically solves the universe.
He does.
And honestly, if the book stopped right there, it would be this beautiful, triumphant endorsement of human reason. But Ibn Tufail does not let him stay in that cave.
No, the thought experiment demands a control group.
Exactly. So, a man named Asal suddenly arrives on the shores of Hayes Island. Now, Asal comes from a neighboring civilized island that is governed by a strict, traditional religion, a religion based on a revealed scripture and laws.
Right.
Asal is a mystic within that religion. He finds the society of his island way too materialistic, so he has sailed to this supposedly deserted island to seek solitude and pray.
And Saul runs into Hay, who at this point is basically a wild man dressed in animal skins.
Right, he must look terrified.
Asal is terrified. But eventually they connect. Asal teaches Hay human language, and once they can speak, Asal begins to explain his religion to Hay. He talks about God, angels, prophets, heaven, and hell.
And Hay listens and experiences this profound shock of recognition. He realizes that everything Asal is describing through religious terminology is the exact same objective truth he discovered through observation and logic.
Exactly. The angels are the forces of nature. The creator is the necessary being.
But Hay is deeply confused by the formatting of it all.
He doesn't get the metaphors.
Right. He asks Asal, why does your religion use all these physical metaphors? Why describe God with human emotions like anger or mercy? Why describe heaven as a place with physical food and rivers? And why does your religious law allow people to obsess over accumulating wealth and property when they should be focused entirely on the immaterial truth?
And Asal explains that the masses cannot comprehend abstract, immaterial concepts. They need physical descriptions to grasp the ideas.
But Hay doesn't buy it.
No. Hay is filled with the optimism of his own enlightenment, so he refuses to believe this. He convinces Asal that they must return to the civilized island.
Oh, no.
Hay is determined to preach the pure, unvarnished philosophical truth to the masses. He genuinely believes he can elevate them.
So they sail to the civilized island, which is ruled by a king named Solomon. And Solomon is actually Saul's friend, but he's a pragmatic ruler who believes in strict adherence to the literal religious law to keep society functioning.
Right.
So Hay starts preaching his abstract concepts in the public squares, and it is an absolute catastrophe.
Total disaster. The masses cannot comprehend a single word he is saying.
Not word.
When he tries to explain that God has no physical form, or that the descriptions of heaven are merely allegories, they view him as a dangerous heretic. They become hostile, angry, and deeply resentful.
And it just breaks Hay's heart. He realizes he is doing way more harm than good. And this is really the climax of the book.
It is.
Hay realizes that Solomon is right. The masses are fundamentally incapable of grasping pure philosophical truth. He realizes that the prophets who originally brought religion were actually psychological geniuses.
Yes.
They used metaphors, parables, and strict material rules because that is the only language the common people can process to maintain a moral, functioning society.
And this realization establishes what is often called the doctrine of the twofold truth.
A twofold truth.
Right. It's the assertion that there's only one objective reality, but it must be communicated in two entirely different registers depending on the cognitive capacity of the audience.
Okay, break that down.
So, religion, with its vivid imagery, its literal rewards and punishments, is an absolute necessity for the masses to maintain social and moral order.
Right.
But pure philosophy, the abstract, direct contemplation of reality, that must be reserved strictly for the intellectual elite.
Okay, listen, I have to step in here and challenge this.
Go for it.
Because this is an incredibly arrogant, elitist conclusion. Is Ibn Tufail seriously arguing that 99% of humanity is just, like, genetically, fundamentally incapable of understanding reality?
Well,
I mean, if Hay had a blank slate, couldn't anyone else achieve what he did if they were just given the right education? Isn't the real villain here Solomon's society, which actively conditions people from birth to only understand the world through material rewards and physical metaphors?
you are identifying the exact tension that modern scholars debate regarding this text.
Okay, so I'm not crazy.
Not at all. But it is crucial to remember the hierarchical worldview of medieval philosophy, which was heavily influenced by Aristotle.
Right, the Greeks.
Yes. They generally believed that human beings possess genuinely different innate intellectual capacities, much like differing physical strengths.
Like some people are just built stronger.
Exactly. So from Ibn Tufail's perspective, the blank slate of the island allowed Hay's naturally superior intellect to flourish without impediment.
But the masses on Solomon's Island aren't given a blank slate. They're handed a script the day they are born.
Oh, that's true.
If you teach someone that heaven is literally a garden with rivers of milk and that's all they ever hear, of course they're going to reject a guy who shows up and says, actually, it's an immaterial state of cognitive unity. They aren't stupid. They've been programmed.
That is a highly defensible reading, and honestly, Ibn Tufail implicitly acknowledges the power of that programming.
He does.
Yeah, the tragedy of the story is that Hay cannot reprogram them. It is too late. The societal structures are too rigid.
So what happens?
Ultimately, Hay apologizes to Salomon and the masses, tells them to stick to their literal interpretations and obey their laws, and he and Asal retreat back to the deserted island to spend the rest of their lives in solitary contemplation.
Man, it is such a dark, pessimistic ending. But the ripple effects of this book are just staggering.
Huge impact.
It's translated into Hebrew, into Latin as Philosophus Autodidactus, into Dutch, into English. It massively influenced the Quakers in the 17th century, who deeply resonated with the idea of finding an inner light without needing the rigid structures of the church.
Right.
And historically, it directly inspired Daniel Defoe to write Robinson Crusoe.
Its legacy in the West is immense. But back in the Islamic world, Ibn Tufail had exposed a highly combustible fault line.
Because of the twofold truth.
Exactly. The idea of a twofold truth sounds like a neat compromise, but it creates a massive structural problem.
Right, because if religion uses metaphors that say one thing literally, and philosophy uses logic that proves another thing objectively, what happens when they directly, publicly contradict each other?
Who wins?
Exactly. If the philosopher says the universe is eternal, and the theologian says God created it in a specific moment in time, they can't both be right.
No, they can't. And Ibn Tufail recognized this impending collision, but he was elderly.
Right.
In 1182, he retired from his position as court physician in Marrakesh. But before he left, he recommended his brilliant young protege to take his place and inherit this intellectual battlefield.
And that protege was Ibn Rushd.
Exactly.
And Ibn Rushd doesn't just inherit a medical practice. He inherits the responsibility to defend the very existence of rational scientific thought.
A heavy burden.
Very heavy. Because while Ibn Bajjah and Ibn Tufail were theorizing about islands and isolation, Ibn Rushd had to step into the actual political arena to save the scientific method from being completely outlawed.
Right. So Ibn Rushd, born in 1126 in Cordova, was a towering figure in both Islamic and European history.
He was a big deal.
Huge. He served as a chief judge, a physician to the caliph, and he dedicated his life to writing exhaustive, masterful commentaries on every single work of Aristotle.
Right.
His commentaries were so precise, so structurally sound, that centuries later in medieval Europe, he was referred to simply as the Great Commentator.
That's a great title.
Dante Alighieri in the Divine Comedy actually places him in limbo alongside the greatest minds of antiquity like Socrates, Plato, and Euclid.
But while Europe was preparing to idolize him, his situation at home in Al-Andalus was deteriorating
It
rapidly.
was getting very dangerous.
Right, the Almohad dynasty was in power, and the religious conservatives, the theologians who adhered strictly to literal interpretations, were gaining massive political influence.
Yes.
And they viewed Greek philosophy, with its insistence on logic and natural laws, as inherently dangerous. It undermined the absolute arbitrary power of God in their eyes.
So the theologians began weaponizing public opinion against him. They spread malicious rumors, claiming he had stated that the planet Venus was a divine entity, or that he denied the historical reality of events mentioned in the Quran.
Just character assassination.
Completely. And the political pressure became insurmountable. The caliph, who had previously protected him, was forced to capitulate to the conservative faction. Ibn Rushd was exiled to a small town called Lucena.
And it wasn't just an exile. They gathered all his books on philosophy and logic, brought them into the public squares, and burned them.
Terrible.
Edicts were sent across Spain and North Africa, strictly prohibiting the study of what they called dangerous sciences.
It was an absolute existential crisis for human reason.
It really was.
But in response to this crushing censorship, Ibn Rushd did not write a mystical novel.
No islands for him.
No. He wrote a razor-sharp, devastating legal defense called Fasl al-Maqal, or the Decisive Treatise.
Okay.
Remember, Ibn Rushd was not just a philosopher, he was a chief judge, an absolute master of Islamic jurisprudence. He realized that to defend philosophy against theologians, he had to beat them on their own turf, which is the law.
I love the framing of this text so much because he doesn't start with abstract metaphysics. He asks a highly technical legal question based on the 5 categories of Islamic law. Is the study of philosophy permitted? Is it prohibited? Or is it commanded?
And his argument is brilliant. He points out that the Quran repeatedly commands human beings to reflect, to consider, and to observe the workings of the universe to understand the Creator.
Right.
Ibn Rushd argues that if the law commands us to consider the universe, we are obligated to do so using the most perfect tool available.
And what's the tool?
The most perfect tool for understanding reality is demonstrative logic, the syllogism. Therefore, studying logic and philosophy is not a heresy. It is a religious obligation. It is mandatory.
Oh, that is so smart. He traps them in their own legal framework.
He really does.
But what does he do about the actual contradictions? Because the theologians were pointing to specific verses that seem to completely defy natural logic.
Right. So he returns to a formalized version of Ibn Tufail's twofold truth. He argues that truth cannot contradict truth. Religion and philosophy are twin sisters. If a logical scientific demonstration proves a fact about the natural world, and a religious text appears to contradict that fact, then the religious text must be interpreted allegorically. The literal contradiction is merely a metaphor designed for the masses.
But the real battle, the one that honestly determined the future of science, went much deeper than interpreting scripture. It was a battle over the fundamental mechanics of the physical universe.
Oh, absolutely.
And this brings us to his clash with the ghost of Al-Ghazali.
Yes, Al-Ghazali. He was a brilliant, highly influential Persian theologian who had lived about a century before Ibn Rushd.
Right.
Al-Ghazali had looked at the creeping influence of Aristotelian philosophy and decided it was a massive threat to the core tenets of faith.
So he went on the attack.
He did. He wrote a devastating, highly sophisticated book called Tahut al-Falasifa, which translates to The Incoherence of the Philosophers. And in this book, Al-Ghazali took a sledgehammer to the foundational pillar of the scientific method, which is causality.
Causality. Cause and effect. The idea that A causes B. I think we really need to break down exactly what Al-Ghazali was arguing here, because it sounds crazy to a modern ear, but his logic was terrifyingly tight.
It was very tight. Let us use the classic example they debated. Fire and cotton.
Okay, fire and cotton.
Right. If you hold a piece of cotton to a flame, the cotton burns. Aristotle and philosophers like Ibn Rushd would say that fire has a specific nature or essence. It is in the nature of fire to burn, and it is in the nature of cotton to be burned.
That makes sense.
Therefore, the fire is the necessary cause of the burning cotton.
But Al-Ghazali says, prove it.
Exactly. Al-Ghazali argues that all you can objectively observe is that the cotton is placed near the fire and then the cotton turns to ash. You see a sequence of events,
Right.
but you do not physically observe a hidden force of burning traveling from the fire to the cotton. Al-Ghazali asserts that there is no necessary mechanical connection between the fire and the ash.
Wait, so why does it burn then?
Because, Al-Ghazali argues, God directly creates the burning in the cotton at that exact moment.
Just spontaneously.
Yes. The fire is merely present. God is the sole, direct, immediate cause of every single event in the universe, down to the movement of a single atom.
The analogy that makes this click for me, and I want to share this, is a movie projector or like a flip book.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, so when you watch a movie, you see a baseball hit a window, and the window shatters. But the frame of the baseball hitting the glass didn't actually cause the next frame of the glass shattering.
Right, they are separate.
Exactly, they are two completely separate static images being flashed in sequence by the projector. Al-Ghazali is saying God is the projector. He's flashing the frame of the fire and then flashing the frame of the ash 60 frames per second.
That is a brilliant analogy, yes. This worldview is known as occasionalism.
Occasionalism.
Right. And Al-Ghazali championed it for a very specific theological reason. He wanted to preserve the absolute omnipotence of God and the possibility of miracles.
Okay, how does that connect to miracles?
Well, if fire must burn because it is constrained by its own physical nature, then how could the prophet Abraham be thrown into a furnace and survive, as the scriptures claim?
Oh, I see.
If nature has unbreakable laws, God is bound by them. Al-Ghazali wanted a universe where God could break the sequence of the flipbook at any moment.
So the fact that fire usually burns cotton is just, what, a coincidence?
A habit. It's a habit established by God, which he can suspend whenever he wishes.
Wow. So when Ibn Rushd reads this, he realizes it is an epistemological nightmare. If Al-Ghazali is right, the entire concept of human knowledge collapses.
It completely falls apart.
So Ibn Rushd strikes back. He writes a massive point-by-point rebuttal titled Tahaf al-Hafut, the Incoherence of the Incoherence.
And Ibn Rushd recognizes that denying causality doesn't just destroy science, it destroys language itself.
How so?
He famously wrote, "He who denies causes denies knowledge. Let us follow his mechanism. If things do not have specific, immutable natures that cause them to act in predictable ways, then things have no definitions."
Right. If fire doesn't necessarily have to burn or give off heat or emit light, then what does the word fire even mean?
Exactly.
It's just a random collection of pixels that God might change into water in the next frame.
Precisely. If a thing doesn't have an essence defined by its causal actions, you cannot name it. If you cannot name things, you cannot categorize them.
Right.
And if you cannot categorize them, logical thought is completely impossible. The universe becomes a chaotic, unpredictable blur of momentary creations.
That is terrifying.
True science, Ibn Rushd argues, is the knowledge of things along with their causes. Without necessary cause and effect, human reason is paralyzed.
So how does he solve Al-Ghazali's problem about miracles and God's power?
Yeah.
Because, he still has to operate within an Islamic framework. He can't just say God doesn't exist or isn't powerful.
He constructs a really profound distinction between human knowledge and God's knowledge.
Okay.
He argues that human knowledge is the effect of existence. We are born ignorant, we look at the world, we observe the chains of cause and effect, and our knowledge is generated by reality.
Makes sense.
But God's knowledge is entirely different. God's knowledge is the cause of existence. God's knowledge is eternal and creative. God did not micromanage every frame of the flipbook.
Right.
Instead, God established the perfect, harmonic, unbreakable architecture of natural laws in the very first place.
So God wrote the code for the universe, and the code runs on causality.
Exactly. And regarding miracles, Ibn Rushd carefully argues that miracles belong strictly to the realm of theology and faith, They should not be subjected to the scrutiny of physical science.
That'd be division.
Yes, but the day-to-day operations of the physical universe absolutely run on the strict, observable laws of causality that God set in motion.
I really want you, the listener, to pause and let the gravity of this sink in. Every time you flip a light switch and expect the light to turn on, you are relying on causality.
Every single time.
Every time you take an aspirin and trust a biological mechanism to cure your headache, rather than just praying the pain magically teleports away, you are standing on the very ground Ibn Rushd was exiled to protect.
Its foundation.
He drew a line in the sand against magical thinking, and he paid a massive personal price for it.
And the real tragedy is that within the Eastern Islamic world, Al-Ghazali's theology largely triumphed over Ibn Rushd's rationalism.
That's a shame.
But Ibn Rushd's defense of cause and effect was translated into Latin, and it sparked an intellectual earthquake in Europe known as Latin Averroism.
Oh, wow.
Thinkers at the universities of Paris and Padua devoured his commentaries. He gave them the philosophical permission to study the natural world on its own terms, independent of theology.
So he influenced Europe directly.
Immensely. The historical texts make it clear Ibn Rushd laid the absolute necessary groundwork for the European scientific revolution.
But while Ibn Rushd's ideas were quietly sparking a renaissance in the West, the East was facing a literal apocalypse.
A physical apocalypse.
You can debate causality all you want, but what do you do when the world is actually burning down around you?
Right.
That brings us to our final figure, Nasir al-Din Tusi and the Mongol invasions.
Yes. We are moving from intellectual crisis to an unprecedented physical catastrophe.
Set the scene for us.
Nasir al-Din Tusi was born in 1201 in northeastern Persia. He was a spectacular polymath, a mathematician, astronomer, and ethicist, but he came of age during the advance of the Mongol Empire.
Which was brutal.
Beyond brutal.
Huh.
Under Genghis Khan and later his grandson Hulagu Khan, the Mongols were sweeping across Asia, annihilating entire cities, slaughtering populations by the millions, and burning centuries of accumulated knowledge.
So Tusi is trying to survive in a literal wasteland.
Exactly.
Initially, he finds refuge with a group called the Nizari Ismailis, famously known in the West as the Assassins. They operated out of an impenetrable mountain fortress called Alamut.
Right.
And Tusi spends decades there, utilizing their extensive libraries and writing his early works.
But by 1256, Hulagu Khan's war machine arrived at the gates of Alamut. The fortress was deemed impregnable, but Tusi, realizing that resistance against the Mongols was ultimately suicidal, played a crucial role in negotiating the peaceful surrender of the fortress.
And here is where the story gets incredibly morally complex.
Very much so.
Because Tusi doesn't just surrender and disappear. He somehow manages to pivot from being a captive to becoming a highly trusted astrologer and advisor to Hulagu Khan himself.
It's astounding.
It is. Tusi literally rides with the Mongol warlord as they march on Baghdad in 1258. The Mongols sack Baghdad, butcher the population, and destroy the House of Wisdom. They throw so many books into the Tigris River that the water supposedly ran black with ink.
And Tusi's collaboration with Hulagu is heavily debated by historians to this day.
I mean, I get why.
Was he an opportunist, or was he a pragmatist trying to save whatever he could from the ashes?
Right.
The evidence points strongly to the latter, honestly, because of what Tusi convinced Hulagu to do next. Tusi leveraged his influence with this conqueror, a man renowned purely for destruction, and persuaded him to build one of the greatest scientific institutions of the Middle Ages.
The Moraga Observatory in northwestern Iran. And this wasn't just like a telescope on a hill. It was a massive research campus. How did he convince a Mongol warlord to pay for it?
Tusi was a political genius. He knew Hulagu believed heavily in astrology to guide his military campaigns.
Ah, he played to his superstition.
Right. Tusi argued that to provide accurate astrological forecasts, they needed precise astronomical tables, which required a massive observatory.
Brilliant.
But more importantly, Tusi established a revolutionary funding model. He convinced Hulagu to fund the observatory using waqf revenues,
What's that?
religious endowments and trusts taken from conquered lands. This provided a stable, continuous income stream independent of the volatile royal treasury.
He essentially invents the modern endowed research university.
He really did.
And he uses those funds to gather surviving scientists from Damascus to China. He built a library designed to hold 400,000 volumes.
Which is an insane number for the time.
And where did those books come from? Tusi literally followed behind the Mongol armies, scavenging and rescuing books from the libraries they were looting. He built an ark for human knowledge while the flood was still happening.
It is a breathtaking achievement of preservation.
Truly.
But Tusi was deeply aware that saving physical books was not enough. He had witnessed the absolute depths of human cruelty during the Mongol conquests.
He saw the worst of humanity.
Yes, he knew that when society collapses, human psychology collapses with it. To address this, he wrote a monumental work of moral philosophy known as the Akhlaq-i Nasiri, or the Nasirian ethics.
Okay.
And he approaches ethics not as a preacher, but as a physician. He is diagnosing the diseases of the soul.
I am obsessed with this text because it is so radically insightful.
It's fascinating.
Because Tusi builds on Aristotle. Aristotle famously defined virtue as a mean between two extremes, the golden mean. So courage is the perfect middle ground. If you have too little, you are a coward. If you have too much, you are reckless. Aristotle viewed moral failure as a quantitative problem, like a calculation error of having too much or too little of a trait.
But Tusi looked at the atrocities of the Mongols and the betrayals of his own era and realized that too much or too little did not adequately explain human depravity.
It's not enough to explain burning a city.
No. So he introduced a third category of disease. Alongside excess and deficiency, he introduced perversion.
Perversion.
Yes, a qualitative, fundamental corruption of a natural faculty.
This is a huge distinction. Give us an example of how a perversion works mechanically.
Okay, take the human emotion of fear or the fight-or-flight response, which Tusi calls the irascible faculty.
Okay.
In a healthy soul, this faculty is triggered by genuine danger. A deficiency of it makes you a coward. An excess makes you aggressive. But a perversion of this faculty means it is triggered by entirely the wrong things. You aren't just feeling too much fear. You are terrified of things that are completely harmless. Or, and this is key, you take sadistic joy in cruelty.
Oh, wow.
It is a broken mechanism. Similarly, sorrow isn't just a lack of joy. It is a perversion of the appetitive faculty desiring things that inherently cause pain.
It's like a compass where the magnet is actually shattered, not just pointing slightly off north.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
But the most terrifying part of his book is when he moves from emotional diseases to the diseases of theoretical reason, like how the intellect itself gets sick. He outlines 3 specific diseases.
Yes. The first is perplexity.
Perplexity.
This occurs when a mind is confronted with multiple conflicting arguments and cannot distinguish truth from falsehood. The mind becomes paralyzed, oscillating between opinions.
Think about the last time you spent an hour reading a heated comment section online. You read one comment, it sounds convincing. You read the reply, and suddenly the opposite sounds right. You walk away feeling exhausted and confused.
Yeah.
That is perplexity. Tusi diagnoses that perfectly. How does he cure it?
Tusi says the cure for perplexity is structural. You must return the patient to the foundational rules of logic. Specifically, you teach them the mechanics of the syllogism.
Okay, let's break down exactly what a syllogism is, just so we have the mechanism clear.
A syllogism is a logical equation with 3 parts: a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion.
Right.
For example, major premise: all mammals are warm-blooded. Minor premise: a dog is a mammal. Conclusion: therefore, a dog is warm-blooded.
Simple enough.
If the premises are factually true and the structure is valid, the conclusion is inescapable. Tusi argues that by forcing a perplexed mind to practice syllogisms, you train it to identify structural fallacies and bad arguments, effectively cutting through the noise.
That makes perfect sense. Now, the second disease he identifies is simple ignorance.
Simple ignorance.
This is exactly what it sounds like. You don't know something, but you know that you don't know it. It's essentially the starting line of all education.
Right, you're aware of it.
Tusi says the cure here is straightforward. Awaken the person's natural curiosity. Remind them that humans are designed to seek knowledge, and that choosing to remain willfully ignorant reduces you to the level of a brute animal.
But it is the third disease that is Tusi's absolute masterpiece of cognitive psychology.
Oh, this one is too real.
It is the most fatal disease of the soul, and it is entirely relevant to our modern crisis of information. He calls it compound ignorance.
Compound ignorance. This is when you do not know the truth, but you presume with absolute, unwavering certainty that you do know it.
Exactly.
You are ignorant of your own ignorance. Modern psychologists literally coined a term for this in 1999, the Dunning-Kruger effect. But Tusi nailed the exact pathology of it in the 13th century.
And Tusi notes a terrifying characteristic of compound ignorance. It is almost entirely incurable through normal debate.
Why is that?
Because the mechanism of healing requires the patient to recognize they are sick. If you have simple ignorance, you ask for a teacher. If you have compound ignorance, you believe you are the teacher.
Right.
You will violently, defensively reject any evidence, any syllogism that contradicts your false certainty. The immune system of a dogmatic mind attacks truth as if it were a virus.
So if you can't argue with them, how on earth does Tusi suggest curing it?
Tusi proposes a fascinating, almost aggressive cognitive therapy. He says you cannot debate a person suffering from compound ignorance using philosophy, theology, or politics.
Because they'll just argue back.
Because those subjects rely on language and interpretation, which the dogmatic mind will twist to protect itself.
Okay, so what's left?
The only way to crack their false reality is to force their brain to experience the sensation of objective, undeniable proof. And the only tool capable of doing that is mathematics, specifically geometry.
Wait, he cures dogmatism by making them do math homework.
Essentially, yes.
Walk me through how that actually works in the brain.
Geometry is an axiomatic system. It exists in a closed logical loop. You cannot have an opinion on the internal angles of a triangle.
Right, they will always add up to 180 degrees. Exactly. Tusi argues that if you sit a dogmatic person down and force them to work through geometric proofs, step by step, line by line, their brain is forced to surrender to an objective reality outside of their own ego.
Oh, wow.
By repeatedly experiencing this sensation of undeniable geometric proof, their mental faculties are essentially recalibrated. They remember what actual truth feels like. It atrophies their reliance on blind assumption.
That is brilliant. It's like cognitive physical therapy. He's using geometry to forcibly stretch a cramped, rigid mind until it regains its flexibility.
It's an amazing concept.
And if we pull back, we can see how this psychological insight perfectly explains his actions with the Mongols.
Exactly. When human nature is perverted by trauma, when an entire society is drowning in violence and the compound ignorance of religious or political fanaticism,
You can't just talk them out of it.
no, you cannot save them just by writing poems or preaching. You have to institutionalize the hard, undeniable sciences. Building the Moraga Observatory, filling it with mathematicians and astronomers, was Tusi's way of forcing a traumatized, chaotic world to look up at the mathematical perfection of the stars and re-anchor itself to objective reality.
What an incredible journey. Let's pull this entire deep dive together for a minute.
Sure.
We've traversed a massive evolution in how humanity tries to protect its ability to reason. We started with Ibn Bajjah in Spain, who looked at the corruption of politics and concluded that the only way to find objective truth was through the strict physical isolation of the regime of the solitary, optimizing the mind by cutting the signal of society.
Right, and from there, we moved to Ibn Tufail, who took that concept of isolation to its absolute logical extreme with Hay bin Yaqzan.
The island experiment.
Yes. He demonstrated that an unconditioned human mind could deduce the laws of physics and the existence of God entirely on its own. But through the tragic failure of Hay on the civilized island, he exposed the dangerous friction between pure philosophical logic and the comforting, necessary metaphors of religion.
A friction that erupted into a full-scale existential crisis for Ibn Rushd. He had to invent a legal framework just to prevent philosophy from being outlawed, and then he had to wage a massive intellectual war against Al-Ghazali to save the concept of causality itself.
The fire in the cotton.
Exactly. Ibn Rushd proved that if you deny cause and effect, you destroy the definitions of words, and you plunge the universe into magical chaos.
And finally, we arrived at Tusi, operating amidst the apocalyptic ruins of the Mongol invasions. He shifted the focus from abstract debate to physical preservation and psychological diagnosis.
He saves the books.
He built the endowments, the libraries, and the observatories while simultaneously identifying compound ignorance as the ultimate fatal disease that destroys human reason from the inside out.
These were not just historical events. They were the architectural blueprints for how we think today.
They really are.
Every time you trust that a medicine will cure an illness because of a biological mechanism, you are relying on the exact framework of causality that Ibn Rushd was exiled to defend.
Yes.
Every time you feel so overwhelmed by the toxic noise of a comment section that you have to step away, log off, and sit in silence just to clear your head, you're instinctively practicing Ibn Bajjah's regime of the solitary.
The tools we use to navigate our reality were forged by these minds under the threat of exile, censorship, and death. Understanding their struggle is, I think, essential to understanding our own.
Which brings me to a final provocative thought I want to leave you all with today.
Go for it.
Tusi warned us that compound ignorance, believing you possess the absolute truth when you're actually entirely ignorant, is the ultimate destroyer of reason.
Right.
Today, we live in a world entirely built upon the exact causal sciences that Ibn Rushd fought to seize.
Yeah.
Yet our modern information ecosystems are actively working against us.
In many ways, yes.
Our algorithms, our curated feeds, and our customized news diets are perfectly designed machines for breeding Tusi's compound ignorance. They validate our biases, they hide contradictory evidence, and they convince us we are experts when we are merely consumers of dogma.
It's a scary thought.
So we have to ask ourselves, are our highly personalized digital worlds actually acting like Salomon's civilized island? Are these algorithms just feeding us comforting metaphors and validating our illusions, while actively preventing us from doing the hard, solitary geometric work required to find the actual truth?